What is up, YouTube? This is TQuentin1, and when I did that Hobbit video, I intended it to be a one-off because, as I said in the video, the experience of watching those movies was a singular one for myself and a lot of my friends. That having been said, there are other franchises that I have a lot of history with, and ones I think it might be fun to share my perspective on. One such franchise is the Kingdom Hearts series. It floats in and out of my list of favorite game franchises because, well, frankly, the good stuff is really good and the bad stuff is really bad. So I just kind of wanted to go through the series, give thoughts on all the main games, just kind of what comes to mind when I think of that entry. There is, however, one issue. While the games I've played I have quite a bit to say about, there's a couple I really just have nothing to add to the conversation when it comes to. So, just like all those stumped contestants on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire back in the day, I used my phone a friend. A longtime friend of the channel, and in real life too, TheUtterChaos, has offered to give some of his personal history with the installments that have become my greatest blind spots. Starting, of course, with the game that started it all.
So, on the subject of the first Kingdom Hearts, where do you even start? What can I say that hasn't already been said by like 1,000 other people? Well, I suppose I could start with the first time I ever played it. It was at my cousin's house. I remember just being enthralled with the world designs. Destiny Islands, Wonderland, Halloween Town, the list goes on. Traverse Town in particular sticks out as a personal favorite of mine in the series. Every time I visited his house afterwards, it was guaranteed that Kingdom Hearts was going to be played. I remember very vividly being stuck on the Riku Ansem boss fight towards the end of the game and having absolutely no clue how to beat it. Not even my older cousin could manage it. And then I remember one of our older cousins was there too, and we tried to get him to beat it, and even he couldn't manage it. And when you're a kid, that's just the most devastating thing in the world. When your older cousins or siblings can't help you, it's a nightmare. Kingdom Hearts also represents, to me, an intersection between two of my favorite things at the time, film and video games. As a kid, I had seen many of the classic Disney animated back catalog, and so I was very familiar with a lot of these characters. At the same time, video games were beginning to work their way into my life as well. And there was a great novelty in seeing all of these Disney characters interact with each other and also getting to explore their worlds. You know, it's kind of funny in retrospect that the first Kingdom Hearts seems a little bit quaint nowadays in comparison to the rest of the series, because the story of the first game is remarkably straightforward. It's a rescue mission, plain and simple. Here, you play as Sora, a simple but kind-hearted island kid. Now, he has several friends, but the most important ones are Riku and Kairi. One day, your island is destroyed, and this weird guy that you met in the caves might be responsible. Riku and Kairi go missing, and it's up to you to find them. Along the journey, he encounters Donald and Goofy, who join his party and his quest to find his friends. That's it. There's no time travel, or playing a sentient code, or messing around with alternate versions of yourself. It's that. Now, towards the end of the game, a bigger narrative is revealed, but it perfectly fits with the Disney worlds that you've already been exploring, something that the later games would struggle with. And something that's so important that I don't see get brought up nearly enough is the score composed by Yoko Shimomura. It's some of my favorite music, period. It perfectly captures the spirit and mood of the different worlds and franchises perfectly. Every time I sit down for a new playthrough and the opening track Dearly Beloved starts playing, I get a wave of chills. To a younger player, Sora really is the perfect player avatar. You're just as excited as he is to explore these new worlds and meet these characters. When the story finally concluded and all the parties had been separated yet again, I was completely hooked. I had to see what was going to happen next. But that is another story.
Kingdom Hearts 2. Here's where I enter the story. So, funnily enough, I actually didn't know that I was leaping into the series at part 2. On the front of the box, at least the PS2 copy that I owned, the Roman numerals were kind of see-through, so I assumed this was the first game. It wasn't until after I'd already purchased the thing that I turned it on its side and saw the 2 at the end. To give you some perspective on how long ago this was, my mom bought this for me at a Toys R Us. Yeah, I know that shit feels prehistoric now, but I was about 7 years old and for the most part played a lot of shitty games. I was just too young to know they were shitty yet. Tie-in games and other assorted shovelware, the dregs that PS2 fans like to pretend weren't all over that system's game library. So maybe my immediate liking of KH2 shouldn't be surprising, but this was a banger. Yeah, the combat was stellar, but there was genuine intrigue to the story. I think especially for me because I was already trying to piece together what happened in the prior game. The lengthy Twin Peaks but Japanese opening hour of the game was straight up some of the most captivating storytelling I'd ever experienced in a video game up to that point. Despite some of Nomura's idiosyncrasies as a writer, and the fact that everyone is clearly reading dialogue not meant for the language it's currently being spoken in. By the time Sora entered the story and we started rambling through the various Disney worlds, I was convinced I was playing one of the greats. Even stuff that I'd make fun of about later, like the ridiculously convoluted narrative structure. I mean, I remember friends playing this with me, and none of us knew for sure where it was going. It was intriguing. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. See, while the journey Sora and Co. took through the worlds of Halloween Town and Space Paranoids was nothing short of a joy most of the time, Kid Me did have some frustrations. The part where I had to escort Minnie across the throne room, for example, I didn't realize that there was an attack you could do together that would push back the various enemies in the room. So I was just frantically pressing the button where you tell her to come towards you while these Heartless just fucking gangbang this little chick. Once I figured it out, though, I got through it fine. Until I got to this cheap bastard. While my first encounter with Demix was a breeze, the second one was a spirit breaker. No matter what I did, how hard I tried, I just couldn't complete the boss fight. I vividly remember a succession of friends at my birthday party watching me get absolutely draxed by this guy. Four fucking people tried this boss fight after me, and none succeeded. And for a long time, that's where my story with KH2 ended, in heartbreak. So many wondrous sights held in the second half of a game that I'd never see. And it wasn't long after that my PS2 crapped out anyway, and the searing pain turned into a largely forgotten dull ache. But years later, when I was in college and the third game was on the horizon, I picked up an HD remaster of KH2 for my PS3, and this time I wasn't going to be defeated. Now, it took a few tries, but I finally got that bastard. After 11 fucking years, I was finally going to see the rest of KH2. And spoiler, it's pretty great. There were other moments I didn't love, but it was nice to close the book on a game that had defeated me as a kid. And while the Roxas fight taught me that I didn't even know the meaning of the term frustration, I was able to complete it a couple months before the release of the third game. So that's my history with KH2. Complicated, but largely positive. 358 over 2 days, or 358 half days. I don't know, it's a stupid title. Funny story with this game. That remaster I picked up of KH2 also had a version of 358 over 2 days, and I decided to give that a whirl. Again, in the lead up to KH3, I was kind of having this Kingdom Hearts mania and wanted to be as caught up as possible. Little did I know it wouldn't matter, because no matter how much I tried to understand the story, I just could not wrap my head around it. Funnily enough, I started playing it and then figured, you know what? I'm not super invested. I'll skip this cutscene. I'll just try out the gameplay. And when I skipped that cutscene, another cutscene started. No biggie, skipped it and kept skipping. About 10 minutes later, I was watching credits. I did not realize that this copy of 358 over 2 days was literally just the story. I could have just watched the compilation of all the cutscenes on YouTube. I don't have much to say about that story. I think the narrative of Roxas largely goes off the rails once we find out more about him. In his case, less is more. I understand there's a lot of people who are super emotionally invested in it. I'm just not one of them. Birth by Sleep is a game I kind of feel bad for. Lots of franchises, when they do a portable installment, it's hard not to feel like you're playing a stripped down, great value version of an already amazing franchise. God of War did it, Resistance did it, and it's fine when you're playing those on a dinky ass PSP. But when you're playing a remastered version on a console, it's hard not to compare it to the other games and notice how lacking it is. It's not all terrible. I actually think there's some cool gameplay mechanics in here. I think the combat is different and definitely you got less to play with, but it is ultimately satisfying. And I think it is cool to see some of the more classic Disney films represented. I enjoyed that we got to go to the Cinderella Castle and Snow White's Forest. I thought that was fun. I'll be honest, I played a lot of this game, but I didn't complete every campaign, largely because of that stupid ass rhythm game in Disney Town with fucking Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Dude, I almost threw my controller through the wall when I got to that shit. Overall, I think Birth by Sleep is okay. I'd put it on par with something like Chains of Olympus or Assassin's Creed Liberation, where if you're a die-hard completionist, there's material here to sustain you, but I wouldn't ultimately recommend it.
So, in order for me to give my thoughts on 2.8, I have to very briefly give my thoughts on Birth by Sleep, which this acts as a sequel to. Not a fan. Didn't like the story, the characters, and worst of all, the gameplay. I thought it was a hackneyed retread of the first game with worse writing. The story of Terra, Aqua, and Ventus, while purposefully trying to draw parallels to the first game, lacks much of the soul and wit that it had. So, with all that being said, you might be wondering, well, gee, if you didn't like Birth by Sleep, why in God's name would you want to play more games with these characters? While it's certainly true that I didn't like Birth by Sleep as a game, I thought that these characters all had potential. At the end of BBS, all the main characters had been separated in one form or another. With Terra effectively dying, his soul trapped away from his body, Ventus being put into a coma, and Aqua being trapped in the realm of darkness. The biggest change from BBS to 2.8 is the combat system. Rather than using the old command deck system, thankfully, we've returned to the more traditional real-time combo system. This game is also notable as it was the first time players would get to experience the new engine for the series, this game effectively serving as a demo for Kingdom Hearts 3. Another aspect that I believe is improved from BBS is the acting. Now, given that most of the main cast from BBS show up as flashbacks in this game, the brunt of the story is carried by Aqua this go-around, and I must say, it is a marked improvement. Willa Holland this time around really gets to shine as the voice of Aqua. Now, I'm not sure if it was just due to inexperience or bad direction last time, but Aqua for me in BBS just sounded bored and lifeless oftentimes and was emotionally distant, which is absolutely not what that character is supposed to be conveying. But this go-around, the pain and confusion and guilt that she feels over the events of the previous game, well, they do somewhat ring true. Now, it's not the absolute best performance in the series for me, but it's still a huge change for the better. For me, at least, the game serves as a neat distraction. It's fairly short and does give some context for where Aqua has been all this time, though that does admittedly cause some plot holes with the previous games, but hey, that's just the nature of this beast at the point where Kingdom Hearts.
Kingdom Hearts 3. Perhaps the most controversial game in the series, but I think that was pretty unavoidable considering the 14-year long wait for this entry in the franchise. What game could possibly live up to that? So, no, Kingdom Hearts 3 is not a bold step forward for the medium of gaming, nor is it a life affirming piece of art that'll make you feel good about how long you waited for it. And it's funny, the hate I see for this game seems mostly directed at the narrative, which by this point I was completely uninvested in. I didn't give a fuck about Xehanort or the Keyblade wielders who opposed him. I just wanted to fuck around in some Disney worlds and whack stuff with my stupid impractical fantasy weapon. And as that, I gotta say I enjoyed KH3. I was mostly satisfied with it. It's not the classic that KH2 was, but as a gameplay experience, I left happy. The already excellent combat has been refined, and With each encounter, there are so many tools and toys and crazy things that could happen. There's a real variety here on top of the already satisfying foundation laid by the other games. And while largely the films covered here are ones I don't feel any attachment to, it was dope to see Pixar finally get some love from the KH crew. There are some issues. I wasn't a big fan of the new quasi open world structure of this game. In fact, I thought it really harmed the pacing at points. And some worlds are definitely pretty half baked, like Arendelle, which is essentially a big maze and not a fun one. Graphically, though, I think this looks incredible. It was one of the first times I'd picked up a Square Enix game in years that didn't feature Rico Rodriguez toppling a government, and I had missed this series and this style. I know some were pretty let down by the disparity between Disney and Final Fantasy in this installment, but I'll be honest, the only FF games I've played are Numera's own FF7 remake series. I was in such a different point in my life, but largely I didn't feel that rush of nostalgia that I got from, say, The Force Awakens. Kingdom Hearts was a fun game, but the narrative had gotten so complicated by this point that I just really wasn't invested in this story anymore. Seeing these characters return was not big and impactful for me, but it was undeniably cool to get one of these again. It's dated in all the best ways, a throwback to a simpler time in gaming when being cool and fun was enough to get you by, when loot boxes and giant exploitative season passes were just glimmers in Activision's greedy eyes. I will say the final section of this game is pretty incredible. The boss fights have always been one of the series' major strengths, and building the entire last third of the game around that was a genius choice. One that sticks out in my memory fondly is my fight with Vanitas. I mopped the floor with that motherfucker. I remember joking at the time, like, dude, this guy's even weaker than the real Haley Joel Osment. Again, I have very little to say about the story, but when I saw hashtag former Keyblade wielder, I laughed so hard I may have actually given myself a heart attack. That having been said, yeah, my feelings on KH3 aren't nearly as complicated. It's a fun game. I enjoyed it. Came at just the right time for me, but the story's not over, is it? Kingdom Hearts 4 is on the horizon. I gotta say, for as much as this series gets wrong and as many missteps as it's had, I always do look forward to another one. There's something about how they're still making these that just brings me joy. It's a little bit of stability in such an odd and truncated gaming world we live in. That having been said, this is T Quentin 1, signing out.